Working with the UFW was a very valuable experience for me, and I think my presence benefited, I really benefited the union movement. I'm sorry to say that now, one of the biggest disappointments of my life has been that the UFW as an organization has basically collapsed. And there's some very troubling, but I'm afraid true books that have recently come out, written by an author named Miriam Pavel. The first is called A Union of Their Dreams, and the second is the Crusades of Cesar Chavez, just published within the last 6 months. The second book is especially devastating as to the collapse of the UFW, and that the union isn't involved in any kind of national, UFW agricultural organizing, despite the fact that there's this terrific agricultural labor relations law in California that could be used. And that has been a profound disappointment to me. And the people that I was closest to within the union, in the legal department, Jerry Cohen and Sandy Nathan and others who stuck with the union, they were kind of ridden out of the union when they were sort of resistant to this, the strange developments that are documented in those books. So that was a personal disappointment to me. In terms of my work my other work as a lawyer, one thing that was very gratifying was my work with the Construction Workers Association, who are African American construction workers. That really did have a lasting economic impact and social impact, I think, on the African American community in the Seattle area. I mean, there were the five major mechanical trades: the plumbers and pipe fitters, sheet metal workers, iron workers, sheet metal workers, and the operating engineers. They had a membership that was like 1% African American before this organizing effort by the UCWA and the subsequent lawsuits. And now there are 500 or 600 African American journeymen employed in those unions, earning good wages. And that's had a lasting economic impact in the Seattle African American community. And I think that was something I take great pride in having worked in that. As a judge, one of the things that has always concerned me is the treatment of minorities within the legal system. And one of the things that I felt when I first became a judge and learned how the sentencing laws worked, because remember, I didn't really do any significant criminal work in my legal practice. The only criminal cases I ever handled were picketing cases where people were charged with that type of thing. And when I began to see how the drug laws were being enforced, it became very obvious to me that there was a racially discriminatory, racially disparate effect in the way that this was done, because the people who were arrested for selling drugs on the street were usually black and brown addicts who were selling crack on the streets that they would get from someone else, and then they would get a piece of the rock, basically, as their payment. And the sentencing laws were so strict that you would find people who had 2 or 3 convictions, and they were again arrested by the police in what are called buy-bust operations, where the proof was pretty undeniable. The police would wind up with the crack, and the marked money would wind up with the guy who was subsequently arrested right after the sale. These people would be sent off for 3 or 4 years of sentence, and you wouldn't have any discretion whatsoever. And I began to speak out about that as a judge. I began to talk to others about how it seems so racially discriminatory to me. There were plenty of white people selling drugs, but they would be selling it in the men's rooms of suburban taverns, and that's where those type of sales would take place. And there wasn't any orientation towards treatment. And I wasn't the only judge who felt this way. There were, I would say, the majority of the judges began to feel this way. And eventually, I think prosecutors began to feel this way and recognize there was a need for a change. And I think that one of the best things that came about through the leadership of Judge Ricardo Martinez, who was a former prosecutor, was the creation of what's called drug court, which was a rehabilitative court where people could be charged with drug offenses and have them dismissed after they went through a treatment program. So I can't claim any credit for having accomplished that. I think it was really Judge Martinez's leadership and his legitimacy with the prosecutor's office, in having set that up. But I think there was a fundamental change in attitudes by basically the entire legal community, to some extent the police department too, that this was a much better way to handle this, was through a rehabilitative approach rather than these punitive sentences handed down on these low-level street dealers. And there's a recent book that's come out that's gotten a lot of attention. It's called The New Jim Crow, written by a law professor who used to be a criminal defense lawyer, about this, documenting this as a nationwide phenomenon. And both President Obama and Attorney General Holder have made very supportive statements about changing the federal system as the state system has changed. So I feel very good about that, but I can't claim that as a unique accomplishment by me. There was a sea change in opinion about how these cases were handled.